My daughter-in-law banned me from seeing my grandkids to teach me a lesson, but now that I've stopped supporting them financially, she has to get creative to make money. I'm a 60-year-old grandmother caught in a conflict with my daughter-in-law, Kathy. This has been going on for months, and I feel like I'm reaching my limit. My son has been married to Kathy for 9 years, and they have 2 children, aged 7 and 5. My son had a good job, and right before the pandemic, they bought a house. Who could have known what was coming? The pandemic hit, and he lost his job. Since then, he's been struggling financially, trying to cover the mortgage and make ends meet. Kathy has been a stay-at-home mom since their eldest was born. She's been saying she would return to work since their youngest started walking, but I'm not sure about her exact plans. All I know is that I've been helping them cover most of their major expenses and even some smaller ones, like private school tuition for their child, the house mortgage, and more. I even helped with the down payment for their home. I could go on, but that's not the point here. All I want to convey is that I've always done everything I could to support them financially. From covering school fees to family vacations, I've tried to ensure my grandchildren don't lack anything. I've never seen it as a burden. I love making their lives a little easier. Despite this, Kathy doesn't return the same warmth. In fact, it feels like she doesn't even appreciate it. I feel like she just tolerates me, probably because I cover a significant portion of their expenses. Our relationship has never been what you'd call warm, but it wasn't hostile until recently. Lately, things have gotten worse. Kathy has been canceling family gatherings and reducing their visits to my house. Until 2 or 3 months ago, the kids used to visit me every month to spend the weekend, or at least a day. Now, it's been many months since I've seen them. Every time she cancels, she gives excuses that seem increasingly less believable. Sometimes she says they have schoolwork, other times a swimming competition, and occasionally something as trivial as being too tired to make the trip. A few times, I even offered to visit them since I missed the kids, but she came up with even more absurd reasons, saying the house was too messy, they needed to visit her parents, or they just wanted a quiet weekend. I feel like every month they find new ways to keep the kids away from me. At first I thought this might not be deliberate, that it was due to life pressures or her being busy. Now, I'm beginning to wonder if it's intentional. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I feel like I'm being silently pushed out of my own family. Are my concerns valid? I wanted to make sure before letting myself get upset. Times have changed. Kids today seem to want more privacy, and there are so many new trends that didn't exist in our day. Should I be worried? Edit. To provide more context about my situation. Wow, I didn't expect so many comments and questions. Thank you. I realized my original post was a bit fragmented, so here's more context. My husband and I started a farming business almost 2 decades ago. It's not as big as it might sound, but it's sustainable and generates a steady income. Unfortunately, I lost my husband 6 years ago. To cope with my loneliness, I took over the entire operation. Not that it's a large-scale operation and my phrasing makes it sound more important than it is, but I took charge of the business and everything it entails. My son didn't want to be involved in the business or live in the countryside, preferring jobs in the city, and I respect that. They used to visit me fairly often, and I was happy with that. The kids love visiting me and being in nature, and I love making them happy, so I never hesitate to help when needed. Aside from my son, I have a daughter who is doing quite well for herself. Therefore, I don't mind spending my income on my son and grandchildren. Regarding my son's finances, he had a well-paying job before the pandemic and bought a house. Then the pandemic hit, and he lost his job. With 2 small children, it became impossible to manage all his finances on savings alone, so I stepped in to support them financially during that time. Eventually, he found a job, but his financial obligations kept growing as the kids started daycare and then private school. So, here I am, still supporting them. Update 1. It's much worse than I thought. In short, she has banned me from seeing my grandchildren, which, honestly, feels like a knife to the heart. The events leading up to this began with a phone call 2 days ago. I received a surprising call from my eldest grandson. Although he's only 7 years old, he sounded very mature on the phone. He told me that they missed me and wanted to come to my house. When I asked if his parents knew he was calling, he hesitated and quickly hung up. That call broke my heart. Clearly the kids miss me, and I couldn't stand the thought of him feeling like he had to keep it a secret. So, I decided to take action. I sent a message to my son and daughter-in-law explaining that Ben had contacted me. I wanted to clarify if they had an issue with him visiting me, or if they were even allowing him to speak with me. The message went unanswered. The next day, I received an angry email from my daughter-in-law accusing me of manipulating Ben and interfering with how they raise him. She subtly hinted that I was a bad influence and said she didn't want me spoiling the kids with material things. I was devastated. It was clear she was never going to allow me to have a normal relationship with my grandchildren. Until this point, I had done nothing but offer help, care, and love. Her reaction felt completely disproportionate and cruel. After several sleepless nights and much advice from friends, I decided to confront the situation. About a week later, when my son came to pick up the monthly check, I asked if something was wrong and why his wife was avoiding me. At first, he downplayed it, saying she was busy or under a lot of stress. He's a peacemaker by nature and rarely stands up to her, so I wasn't entirely surprised, but I couldn't just leave it at that. Finally, I asked directly if his wife had a problem with me, and if so, why she couldn't just tell me. He became uncomfortable and said, "Mom, I don't think it's a big deal. She's just doing things her way." Then, like a ticking time bomb, the truth came out. Kathy had decided, without any warning or discussion, that I was spoiling the grandchildren too much. According to her, I was overstepping and causing problems by giving them too many gifts. So, to fix things, she decided to reduce the time the kids spent with their grandmother. I was stunned. Was this really about spoiling the kids too much? I've never crossed boundaries. I buy them gifts for their birthdays, Christmas, and the occasional treat, nothing excessive. The gifts are mostly essential items, some books, educational toys, or school supplies. Even if she had a problem with that, she could have simply asked me not to give them gifts, and I would have complied. There was no reason for such extreme behavior. When I asked my son why she hadn't talked to me about this, he looked away and mumbled that Kathy felt insecure and thought the kids loved me more than her. That was the real problem. She was jealous that the kids enjoyed spending time with me. I asked if he was okay with his kids not seeing their grandmother. He tried to dodge the question by saying it was only temporary and that Kathy would loosen up soon. Until then, he said, I needed to be patient. My eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what else to say, so I dropped the subject. That same night, around 10:30 p.m., I got a call from Kathy. I had been asleep and immediately worried given the time. But when I answered, she was yelling at me on the other end, accusing me of manipulating my son against her. She said, "You complained about me, and now you'll face the consequences. You're banned from my children's lives forever." I was stunned. I didn't even realize when she hung up because I was still holding the phone, trying to process what had just happened. How could she simply ban me from being in my grandchildren's lives? I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night and had to take pills the next day. Later, my son called me from work and apologized for Kathy's behavior. I asked him what had caused her to lash out at me like that. He said he had been talking to her about letting the kids see me because he knew how heartbroken I was without them. That's when she realized he had been talking to me behind her back and decided to set the rule I wasn't allowed to see her children. I was curious to know what led to such an extreme measure. 3 months ago, I took my grandchildren to Disneyland. They had been wanting to go for a long time, and after the trip, they couldn't stop talking about it. This made Kathy feel insecure, as if her children were slipping away from her. How ridiculous. Doesn't she understand that kids tend to talk endlessly about experiences they love, and Disneyland is one of those magical places? Instead of being happy for her children's joy, she felt jealous. How shallow. I asked my son if he planned to do anything about it. His response shocked me. What can I say? She has the final word on matters related to the kids. His wife wanted to cut me out of his children's lives, and he just stood there, doing nothing. I hung up the call. It was too much to process. I can't understand it. Do you think this is a valid reason to ban me from seeing my grandkids? Update 2. This isn't a post for advice or suggestions. I just want to vent and feel a little better. I don't know why I can't change the advice tag from here. Anyway, let me start by saying I've never taken the kids anywhere without their permission. Not this time or ever before. I always message her or my son to inform them if I plan something for the kids, and only after they approve do I proceed or tell the kids. If she had an issue with Disneyland, she could have told me. But no, she's using it as an excuse to push me away. The real reason? She's jealous that the kids might end up loving me more than her. What a witch. I was angry and hurt, but what else could I do besides lament? I have no legal rights as a grandmother, and even if I did, I don't have the time or energy to fight for it. So, I let it go. But I couldn't let them continue using me. So the next time my son came to pick up his monthly check, I told him directly that I was cutting off all financial support. They were on their own now. His face fell, and he started arguing, saying it wasn't fair and that I couldn't cut off support without notice. I responded, exactly, you should give notice. You didn't give me any prior notice, so I don't owe you the same courtesy. I won't fund a situation where I'm not considered part of the family. He tried his best to persuade me, even asking, would you give us the money if Kathy let you see the kids again? My son had the audacity to say that, yet he didn't have the courage to stand up to his wife. He was talking as if I were some inanimate object without feelings. I said, I helped because I loved you and the kids, despite your wife's coldness toward me. However, after seeing how far your loyalty to Kathy goes, I couldn't care less. Goodbye. Then he asked, what if Kathy apologizes and makes things right? I laughed and said, good luck. I'll be proud of you if you can actually make that happen. I knew my soft-hearted son wouldn't dare confront her, let alone get her to apologize. If he had any backbone, his wife wouldn't have been able to ban me in the first place. Things calmed down for a while. I admit, part of me hoped my son would come to his senses. Instead, I heard through extended family that Minura was telling everyone I was using the money to control the family. She made it seem like I was punishing them for not obeying me. Hearing this was upsetting. I only shared my side of the story and left it at that. After that, I stopped involving myself in any conversations about her. I missed the kids terribly, so I decided to get involved in social service work to keep myself busy. I realized it was better to use my money to genuinely help someone who needed and appreciated it, rather than waste it on ungrateful people. I thought I was healing from the hurt until a few days ago, when I got a frantic call from one of my closest friends. She owns a salon that Kathy visits frequently, and you know how those places are, they're local gossip hubs. So, they overheard something about Kathy. Kathy was there with her friends, openly bragging about how she had removed my influence from the family. She was mocking my country-style fashion sense and calling me all sorts of names. She was happy to have rid me of my obsession with my grandchildren, boasting about teaching me a lesson for trying to outshine her in front of the kids. She even claimed I was trying to buy their love with gifts and money. Hearing this made my blood boil. Not only was she distancing me from my grandchildren, but she was also mocking everything I had done for them and indirectly for her. I'm sure she's doing her best to manipulate the kids against me, or worse, lying to them, telling them I abandoned them or something similar. Part of me wants to confront my son about this, but what good would it do? He doesn't have the courage to speak up. He's not a child. He knows what's happening, yet he chooses to stay silent. Well, good for him. Update 3. As you can see, it's been 4 months since I stopped financially supporting them. Yesterday, my son finally showed up, looking exhausted. It turns out they've been struggling financially without my support, although my daughter-in-law still indulges in luxury items. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, my son came to apologize, or at least offer some kind of truce. But no, he was there to ask for money to cover my grandchildren's school fees. I asked him how they had managed until now. He admitted he had been using his credit card to get by, but now he's reached a point where he can't pay the bills. When Kathy learned about the financial cut-off, she laughed and told him to find another job to make up for it. My son is already working 2 jobs to make ends meet, while she continues planning to return to work. Honestly, I don't completely blame her. He's been enabling this behavior. When I brought up Kathy's demand to keep me out of their lives, he looked frustrated and exhausted. He said, "Mom, you have to understand, she's just doing what she thinks is best for the kids. She believes they're better off without all the excessive gifts." I couldn't take it anymore. I told him what I had heard from my friend, how his wife had been mocking me behind my back. He looked visibly uncomfortable, but didn't defend her. I asked him, "Is this really the kind of family you want for your children? Keeping them away from their grandmother while their mother scorns anyone who doesn't bow to her wishes?" He lowered his gaze and whispered, "I don't know, Mom. I don't know what else to do." I replied, "Well, for starters, confront her about her cruelty. Make her face reality. Talk to her about your real financial situation and the consequences of her decisions. She doesn't seem to care that her children's education is at risk. All she wants is to keep me out of their lives. That's fine with me, I'm out. But I'm also taking money out of the equation. You can't have my money if you can't stand me." I refused to pay the school fees, telling him that if Kathy's pride was more important than the children's well-being, then he would have to figure it out on his own. He started crying, saying that his children's education and future were at risk because of this fight. I told him their mother should be the one worried about that. I likely won't be here to see how their lives turn out, but she most likely will, and if she doesn't care, why should I? He tried to guilt-trip me, but I reminded him of his own words when he said he'd make Kathy apologize. He became bitter, saying I was just digging into the problem to make it worse, and that he was caught between the 2 most important people in his life. I clarified that this wasn't a fight. His wife had been downright cruel to me, and he stayed silent. I told him, if you had a shred of self-respect, you'd take control of your life and stop begging me for money. He insisted I lower my guard for the sake of his children and himself. I told him I was done being manipulated, and that he should use his persuasive skills to get his wife to contribute financially. He left after that, realizing I wasn't going to budge. I feel bad, sometimes even guilty, knowing the kids might suffer because of this. But I can't allow their parents to exploit me and walk all over me. Update 4. 2 months after my last update, my son showed up again. He told me in a defeated tone that they had transferred the kids to a public school. However, This didn't solve their financial problems. I simply laughed and told him it never would, because they had been living far beyond their means all these years, relying on the financial support they received from me. He came begging me to pay off his credit card debt, as all payment deadlines had passed, and the bank was now chasing him. I simply smiled and said, "No, I'm not bailing you out of this." He asked what he could do to change my mind. I reminded him, "For starters, how about an apology from your dear wife, the one you promised months ago?" He wanted to say something more, but seeing my disinterest, he left without saying another word. I didn't even look at him while he spoke, and he realized there was no point in continuing. A few days later, I received an email from my daughter-in-law. This time she wasn't angry but pleading. She asked if I could help pay for the kids' extracurricular programs, which they could no longer afford. She even wrote, "Please, don't make the children suffer because of your issues with me." But there was no apology, just a demand for money. I read and reread that line, and all I could see was her hypocrisy. She started this issue by banning me from seeing my grandchildren, but now that she's struggling, she suddenly wants my help. Her reason for the ban was that she didn't want me to exploit the kids with money, accusing me of controlling them, and now she was begging for that same money. I didn't respond. 2 days later, she sent a follow-up email. I simply replied, "Get a job." What else could she expect from me after being so cruel? I've worked hard to distance myself from them, and I'm not going to ruin that with these occasional appearances. I've focused on rebuilding my life and centering on things I can control. I joined local groups and started volunteering in social services. I've even made some friends who know exactly what it's like to be rejected by family, and that support has made all the difference. From time to time, I receive a late-night text from my son, usually just to see how I'm doing. I know he's in a tough spot, but I'm no longer compromising my self-respect to fund someone else's entitlement. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday when the kids are older, they'll reach out to me and I'll be able to tell them the truth. Until then, I'm standing firm and hopeful, reminding myself that I deserve respect too. And to anyone out there who has been pushed aside by proud or manipulative family members, stay strong and don't let anyone make you feel less in the family you helped build. Update 5. Recently, I had a meeting with my lawyer to address other business matters, but I also took the opportunity to discuss my situation with my son and grandchildren. During the conversation, my lawyer gave me clear advice. If I want to ensure that my son, and especially my daughter-in-law, do not claim everything I've worked so hard to build, it's best to leave my financial affairs completely in order. He even suggested that, if I preferred, I exclude them from my will to prevent them, or particularly her, from benefiting from my estate without my consent. What concerned me most wasn't leaving my son out but rather my grandchildren, as I've always wanted them to have something when I'm no longer here. Following that discussion, my lawyer recommended setting up a couple of trust funds for them, ensuring that my money remains in good hands and that they can eventually benefit from financial support, regardless of my current relationship with their parents. So, following that advice, we have excluded my son and his wife from the will. However, I wanted my grandchildren to understand my side of the story someday, so I drafted a letter for them. In it, I explain how things unfolded from my perspective, so they can at least understand the reasons behind my decisions. This isn't a choice driven by resentment. I simply want to protect what I've spent my life building and ensure that if they ever seek answers, they'll find my words and understand my version of events, regardless of who they choose to believe. Some people have asked about my daughter's opinion on all this, as I haven't mentioned her much in this situation. She hasn't been too involved, partly because she lives far away and has her own life. Nevertheless, she has always supported me and understands my decision. She's even spoken to her brother, telling him she finds it unfair that I've been distanced from my grandchildren. However, I can't say she's deeply involved in the matter, as she prefers to stay out of it. I suspect her lack of affinity for her sister-in-law also contributes to her maintaining her distance. The truth is that while I'm grateful my daughter is on my side, this conflict has primarily been between my son, his wife, and me. Meanwhile, as I've been putting my affairs in order, I've learned from my daughter and other relatives that my son's relationship with his wife is going through rocky times. Tensions have been rising at home, mainly because my son, despite holding 2 jobs, still can't cover all the expenses his wife considers necessary, and he's asked her to find a job. From what I've been told, their arguments revolve around Kathy insisting that my son be a real man and bring home the money she believes they deserve. However, my son's 2 jobs are insufficient to maintain the lifestyle she desires, and the only realistic alternative is for her to start working herself. Apparently, this is something she's not at all keen on. My son is exhausted and at his limit, but my daughter-in-law remains adamant that he should be able to shoulder the entire financial burden without question. For me, observing this from a distance has been a mix of relief and resignation. Relief, because I'm not part of the storm they've gotten themselves into, and resignation, because it saddens me to see how the lack of control and poor decisions are affecting my grandchildren. But I firmly believe they must face the consequences of their actions, or they'll never learn. Update 6. I'm writing this update with a lot to share, and I hope I can get it all down here without forgetting anything because there's so much. To start, my daughter-in-law has found a job, or something that resembles one. I'm not sure if it's appropriate to call it a job, or even if I should keep referring to her as my daughter-in-law, but to make it clear that I'm still talking about her, I'll leave it at that. It turns out she started earning money on an adult content platform whose name I can't even remember. I admit, I didn't even know such things existed until recently. Don't blame me, I'm a grandmother living in the countryside. I have no interest in seeing it or knowing the details, but I've heard enough to get a clear idea of what's happening, and that's already more than I'd like to know. One might think that with this new income, things at home would improve, that the money would at least ease some tensions. But on the contrary, everything has become even more complicated. The problem is that over time, my daughter-in-law has started earning more money than my son does with his 2 jobs. This, far from calming things in their relationship, led her to belittle him even more, and worse, to cheat on him in a completely shameless way. It wasn't a typical case of cheating where you catch your partner with someone else. She literally began recording content with another person and made no attempt to hide it. On the contrary, she apparently told my son directly that, since she was now the one supporting the household with her income, she could do whatever she wanted without facing any consequences. My son, who was already worn down by all the pressures she had put on him, initially tried to tolerate it. Perhaps he thought it was a sacrifice he had to make to preserve their marriage and avoid destabilizing their children's lives further. However, when the situation escalated, and she began posting those videos with another person, my son reached his limit. Finally, he gave her an ultimatum. I know his personality, and he's nothing like his father. Either she stopped making that content, or they would divorce. Her response was as cold as it was direct. She simply agreed to the divorce, showing no attempt at reconciliation or remorse. In the state where we live, infidelity can influence the terms of a divorce, but I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not sure if all this qualifies as infidelity, considering my son tolerated it to some extent. Regardless, I believe that, given her attitude and the fact that she now earns more than he does, she has no intention of fighting for money in the divorce. Although there isn't much to fight over, given the debts they had until recently. How did I find out about all of this? Well, my son, when all this chaos erupted, came to me in tears. I told him as sincerely as I could that I couldn't help him anymore, and that all of this was in large part the result of his own decisions. It was at that moment that I also told him about the will. I know it was another blow for him, but it was necessary for him to know. I hadn't had another opportunity to tell him about the inheritance, as we hadn't spoken in months, and now I felt it was crucial, especially because this whole situation has made me question whether the children are really his. I don't want to sound harsh, but I feel that people don't change so drastically overnight, and I worry that this behavior is just a reflection of who Minuera has been all along. I clarified to my son that, even if we were to discover the children are not biologically his, my love for them wouldn't change. However, I also told him that if those children are not his and their mother decides so, I might never be part of their lives. So, I asked him to get a paternity test as soon as possible if he truly wants to preserve any kind of relationship with me. This test for me is a way to clear doubts, and in the event the children are his, to maintain my bond with them with a clear conscience. I also made it clear to him that if he gets partial custody after the divorce, I want to see my grandchildren. My feelings toward them won't change. They will always be important to me. But I also warned him not to get his hopes up regarding the inheritance. My decision about the will won't change, and he must understand that I'm not willing to re-establish the financial support he's relied on so heavily from me in the past. He's had many opportunities to do things right, and this is a lesson he needs to learn. So, that's the gist of it. Update 7. My son's divorce has finally been finalized, and fortunately, this time, I have good news. I can happily say that I've been able to spend time with my grandchildren. And when I say my grandchildren, I say it wholeheartedly, not just as a formality to make this story clear. The results of the paternity tests have confirmed that they are indeed my son's children. Moreover, my son has been granted full custody of the kids. This means I now have the privilege of spending plenty of time with them, without any restrictions or interference from their mother. It wasn't because my daughter-in-law didn't want them, as she fought tooth and nail to gain custody. However, the judge in our state made the final decision to grant custody to my son, and much of this was due to the nature of my daughter-in-law's line of work. The children had started to experience bullying at school because other kids had learned about what she does, and reportedly some classmates even showed them the videos. This was completely inappropriate, and the school authorities suspended those students. Still, the judge, seeing the negative effect this situation was having on their well-being and the unhealthy environment in which they were growing up, made the decision to provide them with an opportunity for stability and security with my son. Additionally, more details have come to light about what was happening, and I found out that my daughter-in-law was even recording some of her material in their own home. This was highly inappropriate for a home where children live, and I'm relieved they can now live in a healthier environment. My will still allocates money for my grandchildren, and my son is not part of that arrangement. I remain firm in that decision. However, now I have the joy of not having to wait until the kids are older to enjoy spending time and creating experiences with them. They can visit me on weekends, and there are no words to describe the peace and happiness I feel having them here in my home, where they can play and sleep over without interference from their mother. For now, we are enjoying our time together and healing little by little. My grandchildren are starting to open up, to share things with me, and to show me their personalities in ways I hadn't seen before. It's as if they're blossoming, and to me, that is everything.